Hey Grand Archive fans, we are back from Ascent Boston, and based on what we saw, we are in for an absolute roller coaster of a metagame for this Distorted Reflection season. Now, I know what you're here for. You want to get caught up on the Grand Archive metagame, so let's take a look at the decks out of Ascent Boston that are going to set the stage for our evolving metagame to come. These are the decks you have to know if you're going into any regionals or going to Ascent Taipei coming up soon, or if you just want to see some new interesting decks to try as the metagame continues to evolve, you're in the right place, so let's jump right into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck and welcome to our first meta update video for the Distorted Reflection season. And of course we have to basically take all of the results from Ascent Boston, our first major event in the metagame, and we're going to do some analysis of the top performing decks, show these deck lists to you, give you the really brief rundown, and make sure that you are well informed, know what decks to try and play, copy, play against, whatever you want to do. Let's start right at the top of the list with BobbyTortilla's Ascent Boston winning Fire, Specter, Crux, Ensoul, Lorraine. All right, now kicking things off with BobbyTortilla's Fire, Crux, Ensoul, Lorraine deck. There's a couple of things you got to know. Of course, the namesake of this deck, we're using a Lorraine deck with now Lorraine Crux Knight. And it's been so cool to see how Crux Knight has become kind of the de facto, the powerful Lorraine that people are using. When it was Spirit Ruler was like the obvious choice for so long in the game so far. But now we have this ability to banish a lot of swords very easily. That makes Crux Knight a very scary force. The combination of Clarent Reimagined, which has been a clutch card in this deck as it's a 3 durability sword that banishes multiple swords for Lorraine and provides the Safeguard Amulet-like protection for the deck. All of those components come up every single time you play this deck, which is so cool. We now also have the addition of Fluffy Shopkeep, and this card was insanely clutch for so many players throughout the day, but especially for BobbyTortilla as he was crushing this Boogeyman Firewind Vanitas deck that we'll talk about right after this. But what you really have to understand about this deck, we'll talk about the Shopkeep again in just a second, is that this is a deck that's just trying to go to level 3, and at level 3, it has a bunch of ways to win the game, and that's why it's so powerful now. Of course, we have the just the simple attacking. We saw Bobby do this a lot when it was relevant. Like I said, the Clarent Reimagined gives you a bunch of durability. Lorraine Crux Knight gives you a bunch of power, durability. That just means you have damage on the board. You can just start attacking. You can get there, play defensively, and just get attacks off with Lorraine until you win. That works great. We also have a new card called Votive Runeblade from Distorted Reflections. This is a huge part of this combo where you are able to sacrifice other sword regalia to keep waking up your attacker, and with the amount of power Crux Knight already has, this is super easily a huge sweep of extra damage. Even without doing other cards, other combos, you can do a lot of damage by getting this Votive Runeblade out and having just enough other swords that you've put out to get several attacks in a turn and just kind of spike the damage out of nowhere. But of course, the real trick is the other namesake of the deck, the Ensoul, Spirit Blade Ensoul, which allows you to choose any amount of sword weapon cards with memory cost 1 or less from your banishment or regalia. And then you put those all into play. And then all those swords, while they're out there, can attack as if they're allies. And that is crazy because we have cards like Kerwin and Shrouded Edge. You can't even normally play this in this deck, but it gets to be put into play with Ensoul. Again, that Votive Runeblade, which means you're going to have a bunch of swords in play. After those swords all attack, and you can use the Runeblade to start attacking with Lorraine multiple times on top of that. The Erendite, if you've got your Specter floats in the yard, this can now banish a bunch of them and put refinement counters on it, and now it's bigger for every refinement counter on it, so you get to do some crazy stuff there as well. And then just our basic Sword of Seeking, Drawn Blade, and then that Clarent Sword of Peace, which even gets to come out as well, even if you banish it to Reimagine. So all that's so cool. This is against a lot of decks. You just play Ensoul, they can't deal with it. They win. They need to have cards like Resolute Stand, Sovereign Sanctuary, something to prevent a lot of damage on the turn. Even then, you get those abilities to spike high amounts of damage with Lorraine, with Erendite and everything. So this deck became just so resilient, so robust, so many ways to win the game. And it's all powered up by, and I'm only going to talk about it deeply this one time, the Rile the Abyss package, because this is going to show up in a few more of our decks today. And if you don't understand this, this is a card that just went to category 2 on the ban list, which means it's not banned, but they're watching it closely. It could be banned on the next banned and restricted list update. It might not. We'll have to see how the metagame shifts. We'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But Rile the Abyss allows you to draw a card, then discard up to 2 Specter cards, and then draw a card for each card discarded this way. And we have cards like Evercurrent Raider, a Specter that just has floating memory. No, we can't play it in this deck. It's just a water floating memory card that your whole purpose is to discard it. Undying Dreams, you actually can play this one. It has floating memory as well, and it does come up sometimes. This +1/+1 to any ally, another key tool that Bobby did try to use defensively against the Vanitas deck as well. And if it's ephemeral, like on the Liminal Guide, you put a buff counter on it. And speaking of the Liminal Guide, that's the big one, right? The Liminal Guide gives you this extra card velocity when you discard a Liminal Guide in a float, and then you go to level 1 on turn 2. You're going to banish the float to pay the cost. Then the Liminal Guide comes out and draws you a card. So whereas we used to just not be able to get all that advantage from discarding a lot of float right away, now we can discard the amount of float we need and then the Liminal Guide. And then that gives us that card draw early. And the way it works in Grand Archive, of course, you guys, as you know, you draw cards early on in the game that builds velocity because cards in hand are actions. They increase your actions, either the amount of actions or the strength of your actions using. So the earlier you do that, the stronger actions you have throughout the game, and that builds and builds and snowballs, and that's how some of these decks run away with all that value, right? So that's the package. That's kind of how the deck works, and of course, all this was really powered up against those destructive Vanitas decks for Bobby by playing the game. He talked about it in his interview. I just have to survive the first 2 turns. Those are the most important turns of the game. Have to play really defensively. So he would do things like play his Fluffy Shopkeep, Banishing Swords, which is going to power up Lorraine later on, which is great. Draw a card, replace itself. Now this can intercept for him. And while that one interceptor is not enough against the Vanitas deck, he would back it up with cards like Resolute Stand. You Resolute Stand on the Fluffy Shopkeep, not on your champion, on the Shopkeep, which meant that now it could intercept all of the attacks your opponent can throw, and it barely takes any damage from any of them, if any at all. So these kind of plays would allow Bobby to play really defensively, avoid the taxation, avoid taking the damage, and then play to that long game where he knew he had the advantage. So Ensoul, incredible deck now. This is one of the best Specter decks that is in the metagame. Definitely if you want to play a Lorraine level 3 deck, you want to play a Specter deck, you want to kind of play the best of the best and then try and adapt it for what you're going to see, this is going to be the place to start. All right, now moving on to the Boogeyman deck from the event. This is a big one, but we have to give a shout-outs where they do right away. So absolute crazy shout-outs to Team Chess Club and especially Picklesword, the deck's creator, who got 5 of their members into the top 8 on this deck. It was just a crazy thing to see, and it would have been 6, but they had to do a team kill at the end. It was the only way to get in. So really, really remarkable. We have rarely seen such an incredible team performance. In fact, that might be the strongest single team performance at an Ascent that we've seen in the game. This was just crazy. Now, you got to understand, I think the most important thing about this deck is that the reason this deck is so effective is it was an attack on the metagame that nobody was expecting, okay? I think this is a deck that you definitely should sleeve up and play and test against and explore, because this is a deck people are going to be looking at and people are going to be trying to take, and you don't want to be caught off guard by this, and you want to know some of the cards and the plays that are going to beat this deck. But to know that, you have to know what this deck does. So this is Fire, Wind, Vanitas, Horse and Taxes, or Ponytas, the other thing that the deck was being called a lot. This plays Spirit of Fire, the Vanitas line 1, 2, and 3, 3 being the important one here, and then it has a very specific setup, including a bunch of Rile the Abyss package stuff. But the line that this deck tries to do is on turn 2, it goes from Spirit of Fire to leveling to Vanitas Obliviate Schemer and, during the Materialize phase. Then it would play either a Dungeon Guide or it would play a Beseech the Winds to level to 2 during the main phase, leaving you with 1 card left in your memory. Then it would play any 2 reserve cost ally or card to be able to get 2 more in memory to use the Vanitas Dominus Rex ability to activate it out of the material deck like a second Dungeon Guide on the turn. And sometimes this would take the deck down to 0 influence, and it would proceed to win the game from there, which is crazy because the power of Vanitas Dominus Rex is that you get this punch in that does damage, and on champion hit, cards that opponent materializes cost 1 more to materialize until the beginning of your next end phase. So this is why it's called Horse and Taxes. A lot of the 2 drops are going to be these horses. We have Dilu. This is the big one. Dilu and Red Hair, the two horses from Mortal Ambition. But Dilu Auspicious Charger was the best one because it was more resilient with the 4 life. But as you're level 3, the Pride 3 means that you can start attacking with these things. And by playing the horse along with whatever guides you might have a liminal, you might have a dungeon guide out, and then using those to clear the way, clearing out those taunters or interceptors, you could almost always guarantee to get a punch off from Vanitas on turn 2. And that meant if you're going first in the matchup, this is before your opponent has leveled 95% of the time, right? 98% of the time. So starting from their very second turn, the opponent is forced to now pay +1 on everything they materialize for the rest of the game. And it was really hard to defend against too, because if you would try to use something like a Resolute Stand to prevent the damage, they would bring out Impact Hammer, and then they would use that to get extra damage on the Vanitas swing so they could punch through the Resolute Stand. If you tried to bring out any sorts of taunters or interceptors, the horses would clear the way. And if those got too big, the Beast Soul Visage could go on the horse to give it +2, Pride 3, which doesn't matter because it already has Pride 3, and just buff it up so that it could punch through, deal damage. And you could just use this to kind of deal extra damage and close the game. Same thing with the Impact Hammer. And then if you tried to do other damage prevention, Volda, Smolder Spire would come in and prevent that from stopping the damage as well. The deck then would just use a couple other tricks like the Searing Rebuke alongside the Fractal of Sparks, which is just another reasonable 2-drop. It's not as good as the horses, but this could add up a lot of damage over the game. And also, importantly, didn't you put you down to 0 influence because this is a reservable Fractal as well. And the combination of those cards, the Impact Hammer self-damage, the Fractal of Sparks damage, made Searing Rebuke able to also be a damage spike into the late game to kind of close the game off, or key prevention to make sure that you could, obviously survive. This deck was crazy. This was such a cool tactic. It's really fun to see it play. It did extremely well, but there are going to be some things that beat this, okay? There are going to be things like Eternal Magistrate. It's going to make it so that the deck is just simply unable to do that fast turbo leveling outside of the materialize phase. There's going to be things like water decks may be coming back with Frostbind because the activation of Dominus Rex is an activation. So anything that targets a card activation can target and negate that. So there's going to be some interesting room for people to explore, let alone the plays we saw BobbyTortilla doing that would just be very defensive and kind of stop that taxation and hold it off. And these late game level 3 decks getting to that later stage without taking too much to taxing would generally be in a better position to win. But this is a cool deck. I'm excited to see how this adapts going forward. I'm excited to see people try it out, try playing it. It's the funniest mirror match in the world to play this because both of you just go to like 0 influence, just start punching each other. But this is a cool deck, incredible job from Chess Club, Picklesword, everyone involved. You guys were phenomenal. Deserve every bit, every spirit that you won at that event. And now let's see what happens in the metagame with this going forward. Okay, so we have a couple more top 8 decks to talk about before we reach down a little bit more and see what else was down there. But these are going to be basically all Rile the Abyss powered decks, so we're not going to talk too much about them, but we do have to shout out the people who played them, and then some of the unique kind of ways that people approached playing these decks. The first one is going to be a Fire Luxem Zander. Now, in the last format, Wind Luxem Zander was really the best choice, but Rile the Abyss has powered out this Fire Luxem package now to be way preferred for people because you're able to get to that level 3 and have your 10 cards in hand to be able to do your double Lightweaver's Assault combo just like right away, just so fast. Now, this version piloted by Robotron was really interesting in that it built the deck a little differently than how a lot of people were approaching the game. With a Luxem Zander package, it's a very, very consistent version of the deck with mostly 4-ofs of everything. We don't see things like the Illuminating Strikes in here, or striking Illuminance. Sorry, I was thinking the wrong name. Striking Illuminance in here, which is used a lot as just an extra Lightweaver's Assault, because instead it's saying, look, I'm just drawing enough cards anyway. I'm not going to worry about it. And then use the, classic thing that we're doing this deck. Of course, if you've never seen this before, Zander Blinding Steel is going to reveal cards at the start of your Recollection phase, make your opponent put cards down from their hand. And then when you reveal a lot of your Luxem cards, things like Luxem Sight, you get to recover 3 when it's revealed. Lightweaver's Assault, you deal 2 damage to something when it's revealed. Gleaming Cut, you banish it and draw 2 cards when it's revealed. So you just you go to this late game. It's a very control style deck. It's just trying to hold down the fort for a few turns, go to this late game, stabilize, and then win. So by drawing all our cards with our Thieving Cuts in here, for example, to draw extra cards, our Juggle Knives to draw cards, dig through the deck, and then now with the addition of Creative Shock and Rile the Abyss, we are digging, and then we have the Scry the Skies, which is a Luxem staple from the past that allow you to just look at the top, glimpse 3, and then glimpse 3 cards in your deck. Then if you find a Luxem card, you can just put that right into your memory for next turn, which is perfect. That's where you want it to be. We just decided now in Robotron's build that we don't need to run all those little extra 1 of 2 ofs. Let's just be consistent. Let's run 4 Uncover the Plots, which I like a lot, because Uncover the Plot's extra thing that it does in Luxem is gives you a burst heal. Because when you get to level 3 with those cards in hand, you can now play the Uncover, reveal 2 Luxem sites immediately to get an immediate 6 recovery. You have a second Uncover the Plot, you get to do it again. You play a Lightweavers, you get to do it again. It creates these lines that this deck is able to use against the really powerful aggro decks that we now see in the format, one of which we'll talk about very shortly, which otherwise might just find, ways to kill Luxem before it can stabilize. So personally, Robotron, I'm with you. I love this 4 Uncover the Plot in here. I love just having that way to get a burst heal to stabilize right when we need it, rather than going for more of the kill plays, because you're going to probably win the game eventually. Once you get to that stage, you're Luxem against a lot of decks. The thing that Luxem's always really worried about, and something that Robotron is playing one of on their own in here, is Regal Inquisition. This is the new Exalted Element card, which means you have to have unlocked an advanced element of any kind to be able to use this. But when you do, you get to look at your opponent's hand in memory and discard any number of cards that you want to, and then they draw cards to replace it, but you get to see everything that they draw as well. This is a clutch card. I think it's been a bit of an overrated card, just as far as its ubiquity and application. But against certain decks like Luxem, this card is really good at taking them out of the game, because you just find all of those Lightweavers, or those Lightweavers or those Luxem sites, get rid of them, have them discard them. Now they can't get all that recovery. They can't find those damage lines. It gets a lot tougher. But of course, we always have Incapacitate, right? It's a powerful card to negate action cards. And we're just going to count on being faster and more resilient and just getting there. We, of course, still have the Spirit of Serene Fire for that extra recovery. We'll get to level 3, and now that we have Rile the Abyss and so many cards in hand, we'll just Lightweavers them faster than they can possibly find and execute a Regal Inquisition through our Incapacitates. So I don't hate the plan, and obviously it worked out really well for Robotron as they were able to make it all the way into the top 8 and score their own Spirit. So congratulations, Robotron. Really great build of this. I really like seeing this, and this is where I would start if I wanted to play Luxem in the new metagame. All right, now let's talk about the deck that was the hot deck going into Ascent Boston. Did get a placement in top 8 from a longtime serious tournament grinder, Skysama, who has placed at a top 8 before as well. So definitely a good player showing us how to pilot this deck to success. This is Fire Gwoja Aggro, Suzaku Aggro, also known endearingly as KFC, the Kentucky Fried Chicken, or I prefer Korean Fried Chicken personally. Deck is going to put this Gwoja out. We all have seen this before with the Fabled Ruby Fatestone. Brings the Suzaku out when you deal enough non-combat fire damage to things. The Suzaku is a 4/3 Spell Shroud beast who is able to then attack, and then whenever it dies, you get to banish 3 fire element cards from your graveyard to bring it back out. So the reason people call this KFC now, this is basically just the Fire Aggro Suzaku from the past, but with the Rile the Abyss package in here as well for a little bit of consistency, a little bit of the burst, that draw card liminal. But now we have the addition of Peppered Chef. And the chef is here to cook up the chicken, cook up the Suzaku by playing it, sacrifice Suzaku, gives Peppered Chef +2 until end of turn, so it's a 4/1 for 2. And then you get to activate that Suzaku ability or trigger that Suzaku ability, bring it back and attack again with Suzaku, which makes Peppered Chef a 2 reserve, 8 damage play. And that's just frankly ridiculous. That's absurd. That's a crazy amount of damage. And now the addition of these decks, and people play Suzaku differently, either going with the Rile package or ignoring the Rile package. The Rile package gives you a little bit more mid-game power, right? It gives you a little bit of burst. Sometimes you find this Rile start. You get to discard cards like Vengeful Paramour, which is another spirit that you can, if you need to, activate it, or just play it as a 2-drop 2/1. If you just need that extra damage that way, you get to, of course, discard your Liminal Guides, your Undying Dreams. Get that float, because you know in a Guoja deck, the very first thing you need to do on your turn 2 is to go to Guoja, because you need to get this Fabled Ruby Fatestone out, because you need to start getting quest counters, because you need to win the game. And you need when you're playing a Guoja deck, your champion is really your beast and not Guoja herself. You also have the Guoja level 2 in here when you really need that extra health, get those extra quest counters. We did see this come into play on stream. This is very, very clutch in here. But otherwise, you have a package of materialize cards that you expect in an aggro deck. The Smoke Bombs, which allows you to get through Interceptors by using the Smoke Bomb on the Interceptor Taunter so that it is no longer a legal target for the attacks. The Sword of Seeking, when you actually do need True Sight to get through stealth to be able to deal with your opponent. The Impact Hammer, so that you can do lots of damage. That's really good, but obviously also the Impact Hammer is a non-combat fire source that's dealing damage to a champion, so that's going to get you a quest counter as well from the Fabled Ruby Fatestone. So that is, that's all just, it's a really, really nice combo in here. We have the old Impact Hammer Heated Vengeance combo just to do tons and tons of spiky damage. One of the things that this deck is doing that is really neat, and these aggro decks are starting to play in this format now, is Restorative Flame, a card from HVN that didn't get really a lot of play before, but it's been such a fire-heavy, aggro-heavy meta that now this card is really useful. It's another way. You do need fire element cards in your yard to use it, but you banish those fire element cards, and then for each card banished, you get to recover 2. This is a 2-cost recover 6 at fast speed, which is just a way to surprise a fire aggro deck that goes in for lethal and say, actually, you don't win. And then I'm going to take my turn. I'm going to do 1,000,000 damage back to you. So that, along with some of our basic material cards, Tariff Ring, Safeguard Amulet, as ways just to kind of hold down the fort. Importantly, in Guoja, Safeguard Amulet can prevent damage done to yourself, which is really interesting. Like the Impact Hammer damage, Guoja can get really close to dying. And that Safeguard Amulet can allow you to pull that damage out of there without killing yourself, which is really, really important in this matchup. Otherwise, you see a lot of the kind of ways to spike damage and get those quest counters. Searing Truth, Vermilion Decree. This is 2 instances of quest counters. Guys, don't forget that. If you choose deal 3 and deal 2, those are 2 separate abilities that are going to deal that damage and get you 2 separate quest counters. Searing Truth, of course, is also a 2 quest counter card in here. So you can get the bird out really, really fast. Turn 2s are possible with the right hand. So great deck, super fast. If you're looking for one of the fastest, most resilient aggro decks in the format, this is definitely one that works. It still is going to have aggro deck problems, right? Which is, if the opponent stops enough of your damage, the game's just kind of over. And then also against other aggro decks, you're kind of coin flipping. We saw that on stream when Skysama went against Henki the Goat, and it was just I don't know who had the better start, who went faster. And Skysama did end up taking that, which clinched that eighth spot into the top 8. So congratulations to Skysama. Really great showing with an aggro deck, making it a top 8 of Ascent. That doesn't always happen. So really cool to see that. And definitely a great list if you're looking to just turn some things sideways and deal damage. Okay, so we are moving out of top 8 and moving a little bit deeper onto the list. This is actually going to be the 11th place list from Alexander, because this list actually was a bubble out list. I feel for you guys. I'm sorry. I've been there. It's rough. But this bubble out list had the same record as one of the decks that made it into top 8. So it was worthy, deserving of the spot. This is Serene Fire Jhin. I also would have gotten blasted by you guys if I didn't cover Jhin, because this event was Jin's comeback. Jhin is finally a part of the metagame here as of Ascent Boston. Jhin came in and showed a lot of decks that, number 1, they don't know how to kill him when he's just immortal and he heals a lot. And number 2, they don't know how to do multiplication, because there's a lot of multiplication in Jhin, and it's a really hard deck to play. Really hard deck to play, because you have to be spot on with your math, and the math is crazy. It's all over the place. You're talking self-damage every turn from Berserker play, self-damage when you play Shuang-Ji. You're talking about doing self-damage with the Enrage, and then multiplying based on the Enrage, multiplying based on the Shuang-Ji. you're talking about self-damage, not self-damage with Relentless Outburst, but damage to everything else, including your allies that you have to keep track of as well with the Relentless Outburst, but damage thresholds with Relentless Outburst. Proof of Life, dealing more damage to yourself when you take it if you want to, but this big damage threshold for a Wake Up Your Champion attack turn. If you guys are unfamiliar, Jin's whole thing, the reason he does all this damage to himself is that when it's not your end phase, he has immortality. And that means, no, he can die, but only if he has a lethal condition on him in his end phase. Meaning that you can, at the start of your turn, go up to 30, 40, 50 damage. But if you win the game, or if you heal it off before you go to the end phase that turn, then you're fine. So the whole idea in Jin is that you're trying to go to 3. You're using, of course, the Ryle, the Specter package in here. And then once you get to 3, you were just trying to find a way to deal infinity million damage to your opponent. That can be through simply playing a Shuangji and then using an Enrage to deal extra damage to yourself. And then the combination of the Enrage and the Shuangji's buffs going to be a lot of damage. Crack in. If you're not dead, cool, pass the turn. You can do it again next turn. Or you may be trying to do something way crazier. Double Enrage can do a lot of damage. But the Proof of Life thing, as I mentioned, if you're at 40 plus damage, and Proof of Life will double damage dealt to you, so you can really spike yourself up crazy high in damage in Jin. And then you can just pay the 2, banish it from your graveyard to wake your champion up, so you can attack multiple times with that Shuangji, or with some of the other attacks in the deck. We do have things like a 1 of Savage Sunder. We have a 1 of Flame Sweep in here. And then we ultimately are just trying to use any of these methods to try and punch that damage through and win the game. And it's a tricky deck to play, because if these things get shut off, if Shuangji gets fracturized, you start to run out of ways to win the game. Now, the Relentless Outburst is the saving grace here, right? Because this is our non-attack way, our action-based. It's not even a spell, it's a skill based way of dealing a lot of damage. And this also can do some multiplicative damage for 6 damage counters. It's going to be 1 damage to everything, unless you're at 35 plus. Then you can make it that much damage plus 1 instead. Or if you play multiple Relentless Outbursts, it's until end of turn effect. So the first one is 2 for every 6. The second one is 3 for every 6. So there are still plenty of ways to find those kills, but there are just ways to shut it down. Like a water deck is really good against Jin because it fracturizes the Shuangji. And then it can do some recovery from some of the chip damage dealt. And then with this Relentless Outburst, you have things like you already have your Safeguard Amulet set up, or you might also be running Sovereign Sanctuary like this Jin deck is. And you can just kind of just hold off that damage, and your opponent runs out of ways. And if maybe they do get an attack through, they get a double enraged Savage Sunder and you Song of Frost it, right? So Jin has really been waiting as a deck for a format where he can jump in and not be so threatened by water decks or by wind decks that are going to Zephyr his Shuangji or his Berserker Plate or something. And this was it. This was at 63% fire attendance at Boston, 25% wind, 12% water. So this was the time for Jin to pop in and, with the power of Ryle the Abyss, get there. And he was so close, but didn't quite make the top 8. Now the question is going to be, going forward, can this Jin deck survive? And we have new things that really help him out, right? Menflesh was not new, but I just wanted to make sure I mentioned it. This is the craziest card in this deck. Recover 8, and it's free to activate when you're at 25 plus. This card is what gives, it's a time walk for Jin. It's just, I'm going to take another turn. I always get another turn. Jin always gets another turn. That's so powerful. But now we have cards like Sovereign Sanctuary. I love this card in Jin. This is a super Safeguard Amulet, kind of a Resolute Stand as well, all in one, that then replaces itself at the end of the next turn. It's a Fantasia, so it's not incapacitatable, right? It's just going to go out there, and not a lot of people have a Fantasia removal anymore to take it off the board. So this is a really cool way that Jin just can get to level 3 and go, all right, I'm going to get a little bit of breathing room, because Jin needs to put out the Berserker Plate to start drawing extra cards, needs to put the Shuangji. He's going to start dealing damage to himself. His self-damage is unpreventable, but he needs to try and let that damage come through while he builds his hand size up. And so the Sovereign Sanctuary really buys you a lot of time. It's a great card in here. But as we move on and we see probably wind decks start to come back a little more, and then maybe water decks start to come back to compete with the wind decks, Jin might not have as much of a place. But if you're a diehard Jin fan out there, We've seen a couple different lists, and True Champion Gaming also posted their take on Jhin, which is a very different Exia package, a totally different way of playing the deck. Definitely check their deck out too, but I definitely think Vegans or Alexander's here is a great place to start from a great player who really, really deserved that top 8. Again, I empathize with the bubble out, but you'll get them next time, Vegan. That's the Jhin deck. You definitely want to look at that if you are a huge Jhin fan or just want to play fun, undying strategies. Now, digging just a little bit deeper into our format, we're going down. I wanted to not include only fire decks in here for you guys, if you guys don't mind, but I think these are really ones to look at, especially going forward into the new metagame. This is Bonnie Rainn's 19th place Water Unique Allies Lorraine. And I've been saying Water Allies is underplayed, and Boston showed me I was right. There were only 2 people on Water Unique Allies using things like Joy Ying in here, like Bonnie Rainn does to get really, really aggressive. I love this strategy. I love this. Bonnie Rainn showed that it definitely can be piloted well using the Hwaji of Heaven's Rise with Lorraine Wandering Warrior. Then there were a bunch of Zander and maybe, I can't remember, maybe some Tristans on just Water regular allies, but this deck is probably one to look at if Wind starts coming back, as a deck that can really put pressure on just about everything and can shut down lots of strategies. Has cards like Snow White, Weiss Queen, right? This card is number 1, really, really crazy if it can sit on board. But number 2, just in particular, really obnoxious against the Vanitas deck. They need to try and clear this thing. And the reason that Water Allies is so good, I don't need to say much about the strategy. You play allies and attack. That's how it works. But with Water, you like to hold up interaction. Sometimes your allies are your interaction in a deck like this, though. Korhazi Trapper, right? You play the Snow White, play the Trapper. Now, if they try to attack the Snow White, you can remove that preparation counter to protect it further. And even better, one thing I love in this list is Bonnie Rainn's using Rescue the Air, card from Abyssal Heaven that did not see a ton of play in the last metagame. But now, if you control a unique ally, it is a 0 reserve cost. Send an ally you control back to its owner's memory. That means if you have a Snow White out and your opponent gets the attack through, maybe you have a Trapper out as well, and they attack and get you to use your Trapper, and they play another ally and attack the Snow White, you really want to keep it, then you just play Rescue the Air, put it back into your memory, and then play it again next turn. But that's not just Snow White that protects. Things like Lunette. Obviously, this is super good against a lot of decks, ally-focused ones. The Shang Chang is a really resilient ally for these decks to play. This perfect 2-3 for 3 stat line, exactly what we're looking for. Go ahead and keep that. Gildas, how hard does your opponent try to take the Gildas off the board? And then you say, okay, good work. But I'm going to keep it, actually. Send it back to memory. The Academy Guide, I like this in here a lot. Just this kind of cheap, like, you know what? Sometimes I'm just going to +1 on my turn 2 with my Lorraine, and maybe even later on with the Blade Master. And if they go to attack it, you can always, even without a unique ally, you could always just send it to memory if you want to, if you think it's going to be useful in this matchup. It's probably not a line you use as much, but I was just like reclaiming Academy Guides. It's a little similar to that. But though I've been holding back on this one because the one I love in here with this deck is the Sunsa. Sunsa, with this powerful on-enter to put a durability counter on something like that Hwaji of Heaven's Rise and getting that buff on your weapons, your opponent's going to go ham trying to get the Sunsa off the board because the warrior weapon buff is crazy and it's a 1/4 and it's obnoxious. The 4 is already tough enough, but then when you surprise them and go, okay, well, you finally got the last damage, I'll rescue him. Rescue the Sunsa. That is strong. And then let alone, you're just keeping up all your cool interaction, right? Glacial Evocation, Frostbind, Fracturize. We have these ways of just interacting with things. Song of Frost as well here, of course, too, because we have things like Tristan, which is the last deck we're going to talk about here, that you always have to be able to deal with, or that Jhin deck. All of these are just great to be able to hold up with a lot of really, really threatening allies. Things like Exposed Darkness for dealing with stealth as well. That's really huge because Cheshire Cats are roaming around here, and you've got to be able to deal with Cheshire Cats, or they're going to do some crazy like Ranger Boots spike things to you, or Ranger Stride spike things. And then we still have these things that these additions from Ambi that people were really excited about with Water Allies, like Halocline Scout, just to buff up that wide board of damage, to combine with the Hwaji, using it with all your unique allies to just pump tons and tons of damage to the opponent. This is a great deck. Look, this is a great deck. This is an underrated deck. More people need to be playing Water Unique Allies. So thank you, Bonnie Rainn, for making 19th, getting to day 2, and getting pretty close to that score you need for that top 8. This is really awesome. And come on, guys. Look at this water deck. Try this into the meta. I think it's going to be better than you expect. All right, and the last deck we're going to talk about, I know we're getting a little long-winded with these, but I just want to make sure you guys understand the strategy of all these decks, the basic stuff you need to know. This is going to be our Wind Shadowstrike Tristan. Of course, you know, love this deck. Big fan. Main deck Taylor took down Worlds with Wind Shadowstrike Tristan. And this is going to be Astro King's 23rd place deck. This is a pretty basic Tristan list, but with some just cute little tweaks to it. We've seen this Tristan list plenty. You all have seen there's profiles everywhere. You can see how people run Tristan. It tries to go to level 3, draw the cards, Shadowstrike, just, you know, dunk the opponent for 15 out of nowhere, attack with these shadows that Tristan creates, these ominous shadow tokens. They get to dive in, use the power of Shadow's Claw, so they can all use those. They attack for more. And then, of course, yeah, Shadowstrike, unblockable, big, mega big attack. Sometimes ridiculously big because these mastermind schemes put more and more prep counters onto Tristan. So this has been kind of the premier win deck going into this metagame, but it didn't quite get there, right? 23rd place with Astro King. Really tried. I did think it was going to get there, but I think the Vanitas lists really like pushed a lot of these other variety of decks we might have seen out of that top 8. But I want to point out that Astro King's just doing some really cool things in here. I do like Zephyr. And Zephyr is a card that I've been thinking really should show up a little bit more in the metagame. You know, we have decks like Lorraine that are very sword focused, sometimes trying to pump onto a big Rending Flames, and you just want to be able to get that out of there. The Impact Hammer from the Fire Aggro decks. And we just saw the Jin deck that really doesn't like seeing Zephyrs either to kind of ruin their day, ruin their attacks, or get rid of the Berserker plate so they have a lower life going into their end phase so that they lose. So that's just nice to see kind of that respect for that copy of that here. We have the copy of Innervate Agility as well, a card that is just flexible in what it's able to save you from in Tristan. Interestingly, with this Innervate, we're not seeing the Tristan Shadow Reaver build, which I do like in here going into like Crux decks, for example, like Ensoul and Merlin. The Shadow Reaver is able to steal more cards, and then you can kind of bounce between Dancer and Reaver in the late game to get extra value, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it's always been a flexible card to see. But the thing that I really like in here, even if it's at the cost of one of these Shadow Strikes, we're only down to 3 in here, but Spirel, the Schwartz Spirel Schwartz Queen, Briar's the Schwartz King. The Schwartz Queen is a really sick card in Tristan. I love this tech. On enter, as a spell, deal 3 damage to target unit, then you can banish a card from your hand or memory face down. And then you can pay 2, rest this reveal card banished by Spirel with reserve cost X to negate each activation of cards with reserve cost X. And then put each card negated this way and cards banished by Spirel into their owner's memories. Then trigger each of Spirel's on-enter abilities, which is going to deal another 3 damage to a unit, and then put a new card banished underneath it. So why do I like this card in here? Against a lot of decks, they have very predictable lines, very good cards that you know that you're trying to predict. For example, you go against the Oblation Ciel deck, you know that 2 is if there's Extorting Blackjack. You know kind of the costs that they're looking for, and you can prep basically an extra Incapacitate, but for any card, not just an action card. But when you're going into something like an Incapacitate War, you need to have more Incapacitates than your opponent. Incapacitate is a card that you can actually put underneath the Spirel to get like a temporal incapacitate for a turn to kind of just stop a little bit of extra damage right now. And then you can later on, you know, the next turn, you'll get that incapacitate right back into hand. And now you can like hard negate something on the next turn. It's a way to just like buy time with those incaps so you can use them defensively and then draw them back and use them offensively on your turn when you go for the kill. So I think it's sneaky value that people haven't been exploring very much about how you're able to kind of approach this end game and find ways to stay alive for a turn while you like open yourself up to a safe opportunity, you know, letting your opponent go for the dive and then losing those resources so that there's less to protect them on their turn. It's really big. So that's a really cool little adaptation, something to try in Win Tristan. Now going forward, we're going to have the addition of Purifying Thurible, which is the new Proxy's Vault card. And I think that's going to be a huge card in Tristan. I'm going to have a whole video talking about that coming very, very soon. So look out for that. We're going to talk about the impact of that card. But I think in general, that is going to help bring these win decks like this Tristan back into the metagame. So as you're looking forward towards Ascent Taipei or upcoming regionals or store champs, I think you're going to want to look at wind a lot more than we saw in this event. This event did have 8 fire decks and also 5 wind decks technically in the top 8. But these mono wind decks, these Tristan, maybe things like Serene, or maybe things like Wind Ciel, or Wind Allies Lorraine, or Wind Crux, maybe some of these are going to be really good fits for you to be exploring as we now have the addition of Purifying Thurible to try and combat these Ryle decks. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see where the metagame goes. Definitely give these decks a try if you want to explore the metagame. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was very helpful for you. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on some of these decks, on the current metagame, or what decks you're going to be trying as we go forward towards Ascent Taipei, the next major event. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy playing Grand Archive and exploring this metagame, and we'll see you all in the next one.